If you've been struggling with Path of Exile 2 or just looking for the easiest way to level up quickly, kill bosses, farm tons of loot, or otherwise just turn this game onto easy mode, then I have the build for you in this video. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. HDM here, checking out Path of Exile 2 with quite possibly the best starting build for beginners, that is the Mercenary. Now, this build has so many ways to kill your enemies, from damage upfront shotguns, to damage from afar high velocity rounds, to of course grenades everywhere you look. This build has tons of synergies too, and like I said, it's great for beginners in this game thanks to the ability to fight from range, clear massive rooms of enemies, and easily stun bosses and blow them to shreds. But enough talk, let's get right into the build. So I want to start this video by breaking down the most common skills that I made use of during Act 1. So we're going to talk about skill gems as well as support gems in this section. Basically what you need to unlock piece by piece to get this build started. Now, as I said, this is going to be the easiest possible setup for beginners. So about the first 1 to 2 acts of Path of Exile 2. Starting from scratch in terms of abilities though, I recommend you pick up Permafrost Bolts first, as this can function early on as your main CC against both regular enemies and bosses. Basically, this ability is going to allow you to build up frost against a target, and once they're completely frozen, usually in a few hits, they will be stuck in place, allowing you to get off some extra shots. And now you will pretty quickly move away from this skill, as there are better ways, I think, to apply freeze, which we'll cover a little bit later on when we talk about more of our CC abilities. But like I said, you'll use this early on and probably replace it early on as well. So I wouldn't worry too much about upgrading it with support gems and such for this particular skill. Next up, you should also quickly unlock Fragmentation Rounds, and this is going to serve as sort of your main crowd clearing DPS skill for much of the first act in the game and beyond as the Mercenary Class. This skill can be amped up quite a bit as well in terms of damage, which we'll see in just a second, but also Fragmentation Rounds when fired against frozen targets has a really great synergy, exploding the freeze effect and spreading out that shrapnel for bonus damage. And as I said, this can and should be combined with the Permafrost Bolts skill early on to serve as your main combo, and it's super effective at chunking those early boss health bars in like the Devourer fight, for example. Now in terms of support gems to maximize that damage, I recommend Brutality to start. It's going to amp up the damage by about 35% for physical damage type specifically, along with the Leverage support gem, which increases critical hit chance against enemies which are immobilized, again working off that ice synergy to keep mobs rooted in place. Now I did try the Double Barrel support gem for this skill as well, because I thought that just made sense in terms of the ability, but the skill just didn't quite feel as good. I don't know if the support gem is bugged or what, but it seemed to get stuck more than anything else. But as always, feel free to play around and use what best works for you. Next up, let's move on to the Grenades ability, which is another major source of damage on the Mercenary Class. It has pretty much infinite scaling, especially when we start getting into the passive skill trees, which we'll look at in a minute. But basically what you want to do with your grenades is wait until either the enemy is frozen or it's in some type of animation. Then fire off 3 rounds of grenades, which will hopefully all hit your chosen target for massive AoE damage. That doesn't always work out that way, but keep in mind that grenades in Path of Exile 2 also have collision, so they basically bounce off a target and down onto the ground if you've aimed at your feet, so that kind of helps out when landing your grenades as well. And now in terms of support gems, you'll want to unlock Scattershot as soon as possible. This gem lets you fire off 2 additional grenades, so 3 total grenades spread out in front of you. The spread is just wide enough that you can usually hit most bosses with at least 2, if not all 3. So there is better damage potential here for sure, even though it does technically lower the damage of each round specifically. And of course, this just blows up crowds of enemies for easy clearing once you have multiple grenades going on at once. Now, the other gem I recommend here early on is called Magnified Effect, which gives your grenades 40% more area of effect. So basically a wider spread. And then with this, you should be able to see your grenades overlapping more often. And most of the time, this is going to result in huge damage potential when that happens. So that's a really great support gem for this early skill as well. Now, moving on to our boss killer, and this is where the build really starts to click early on. And again, within the first few bosses, you're going to be able to unlock all this potential. But this is a skill called High Velocity Rounds. It's your basic sort of snipe ability, which has a relatively quick speed, a very long range, high damage potential as well. But once you add the right supports, this skill gets really crazy. What I've done here basically is focus entirely on stun with the gems called Overpower and then Ruthless, combining those two together. So the Overpower support gem is going to quickly build up the stun meter on bosses as it builds up stuns 50% faster. So you have that sort of as your baseline, but then what really pushes this over the edge is the Ruthless support gem, where every 5th attack causes 500% more stun. So typically what I see is like by the 5th, 6th hit or so on a boss, not only have you done tons of damage at that point, but the boss is also going to be fully stunned, go down for the count, and then you'll have several seconds allowing you to just launch all of your grenades, blow those up, then rinse and repeat the process. And since this skill has such a long range, you can easily land those stuns from way back, like all the way on the other side of the screen. It's going to allow you to easily avoid most boss mechanics. We even have some mobility skills that we'll talk about in just a minute, but overall, this is just a great skill, and I highly recommend you use it on this build. And finally, towards the middle endish of Act 1, you should be able to unlock your second grenade type, and that is Gas Grenade. This spreads the poison effect by default, but you can also eventually detonate those early with Explosive Shot, though you probably won't have that skill yet in Act 1, but either way, you can add some nice supports here to overlap with your other grenade effects, further adding some synergies to the build. For example, you can add the Corrosion Support Gem to help you break enemy armor, which, by the way, the High Velocity Rounds ability does do bonus damage against enemies with broken armor, so that's another nice synergy there. And then you can also add Bursting Plague for even more poison damage. So typically, as I said, you'll just layer this in with your other grenades, and the extra damage over time you can get here is just kind of the icing on the cake to help you wear down those bosses faster. So that is it really in terms of our main damage abilities for the starting Mercenary build. But I did want to talk more about CC options because while you can start with that Permafrost shot skill early that we talked about, the spread on that ability just isn't as good as other skills you can get your hands on for freezing enemies in place, which remember, that combos really well with our shotgun Fragmentation Rounds skill, so we do want to have that freeze somewhere on the build for the synergy. So two things you can try here depending on what you prefer and what items that you pick up along the way is slotting either a bow or a quarterstaff as your secondary weapon. So Path of Exile 2 does have secondary weapons, and it is a nice way to sort of introduce like more utility or support skills alongside your main weapon, which, you know, the crossbow, which you have as the Mercenary class. You can use any weapon in the game. But these two, again, the quarterstaff and the bow were the best that I found in terms of support for this build. And these are going to open up the game quite a bit for you, and especially allow you to slot some very powerful ice-based CC abilities from either weapon, which to me, I believe are a lot better than that Permafrost crossbow ability, at least early on. Now, initially, I started playing around with Frozen Locus, which belongs to the quarterstaff skill line. This is really nice because not only does it cast ice on the ground, potentially freezing enemies, but it also creates an ice crystal, which can be exploded for bonus damage when you hit that with Fragmentation Rounds or with grenades. Now, as I was playing with this, I also noticed that sometimes enemies would actually switch target from me to target the ice crystal to try to destroy it or deal damage, which is another nice bonus of using this skill. Plus, this can be insanely useful in some of the early dungeons, like the Mausoleum, for example, which has tight hallways and corners, so you can basically block off passages to keep yourself completely safe on the other side, let all of your enemies pile up, get frozen, and then take them all out with Fragmentation Rounds or grenades. Oh, and even in some boss fights, the ice crystal can serve as kind of a way to block incoming projectiles. You can actually stand behind it. It'll absorb the damage for you, so it is a pretty versatile skill, and it really does fit well on this build. The only problem with that is it doesn't give us a ton of mobility, which the Mercenary is lacking. And so the other option, which I much preferred later on, was going to the bow skill tree and picking up Escape Shot. This ability fires off an ice arrow followed with a backwards jump for your character. So it's a great way to actually get some mobility on the Mercenary class, create some space, jump back, and it's really great, especially in the big like overland zones where enemies are coming at you fast and you don't want to get overwhelmed. Plus the ice area for this skill does seem to be much bigger and more effective in terms of the freeze buildup, meaning most lower level enemies are going to get frozen in just one hit most of the time. Now, either way you go here, I recommend capitalizing on more ice-based support gems Things like Deep Freeze, for example, which is going to give you a few extra seconds of that freeze immobilize effect. And then I also used Frost Nexus, which expanded my chilled ground area, so that worked pretty well here also. But that is it in terms of abilities and support gems. Like I said, for most groups of enemies, you're going to focus on that CC or those ice effects to start with. Group everything up, freeze them, then just shatter them either with your shotgun or grenades. For ranged enemies that are a little bit further away, obviously you can use your sniper rifle. At that point, you can also chuck grenades at them, let those explode. But there really isn't anything that will slow this build down, especially once you have all the skills unlocked and working together. And then, like I said, in terms of bosses, this build gets even stronger. Use those high velocity round snipes. Just stay back as far as possible. Avoid the mechanics. You'll be able to down the boss in 5 to 6 hits with a full stun break. And then just launch all your grenades. Rinse and repeat pretty much. It's very simple, very strong. With that said, let's go into the passive tree next, because this is also very easy to sort of understand and get started with. The Mercenary honestly is one of the simplest classes in Path of Exile 2, which does make it great for a starting build or for beginners if you haven't played the game before or previous game. Now, luckily for the Mercenary, it's really easy. The most effective starting route that I found is really focusing on projectile damage. And you can see we get tons of bonus damage just for going straight through the skill tree, basically, and picking all the damage nodes for projectile damage. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You get a little bit of extra stun buildup, extra strength and dex. 6, 7, 8, 9. About 9 bonuses to projectile damage. So you're getting 100% essentially extra damage on all your projectiles. That's an amazing start. And that's what makes the Mercenary so easy as a starting class, because you can just pump out the damage. And after that, you'll just get into a couple of bonus skill options. This really, it's not a huge difference at this point. If there's certain gear pieces that you want to try out, you might need more intelligence, you might need more dexterity, so you can change those around as needed. I do recommend the knockback nodes going this way. That's going to help a lot with the Fragmentation Rounds. And then eventually you're going to want to start filling out this circle here, which is pretty much all grenade focused. So we have bonus grenade damage, grenade area of effect. You can get additional projectiles here, more area of effect, increase cooldown recovery, extra cooldown use, cooldown recovery, more cooldown recovery. So that's what I would recommend to start with. That's going to get you easily through the first act of the game. And it is very, very simple. Okay, so we can talk about weapons and armor for a little bit next. I don't think this makes a huge difference in the early game or for any type of beginner build. So I wouldn't stress about the types of equipment that you're getting. But there are certain traits that I do recommend that you look for that will make this build a lot stronger and a lot easier to play. So to start with, what I would actually look for the most is some boots that have increased movement speed. And this is really huge in this game. You do so much walking in this game for one thing, and the zones are so large that anything you can do to increase your movement speed is going to be a huge benefit to you. These will start at about 10% increased movement speed for a blue quality set of boots. And then it'll just go up to there. I've seen 15, 20, 25. But right away, you just want to basically look at every single pair of boots that you get. Look for increased movement speed. If it doesn't have it, you can try doing the different upgrades. See if you can get it. Just keep looking until you get one and then stick with that one. Because, like I said, not only is it going to make it easier for you to get around on the Mercenary, it's going to make you more effective because you can move. You can avoid boss mechanics easier while getting off your shots at the same time, so it does make a big difference. What else makes a big difference? Obviously your main weapon, which is the crossbow. The main stat that you want to look out for is physical damage, and also traits that increase your physical damage. The higher that stat is, the better, because that's most of your main damage is going to come from that. You can have other traits, of course. Accuracy is nice, for example, on a weapon. This one upgrades all of my projectile skills, so that's pretty cool as well. In terms of that offhand weapon, we talked about you can use a quarterstaff, you can use a bow to get some extra CC. I like the bow right now. Stats really don't matter as much because you're really just using it for that CC ability. So again, I wouldn't worry about specific stats on the bow right now. But I'll just go through a couple of the other item pieces that I picked up so you can see, and I'll talk about some different traits that I think are helpful. Talked about accuracy rating. Also, anything that you have to your main stats. Dexterity is going to be really good. Strength is good as well. Even some intelligence if you want to slot other skill gems that require intelligence. You can see I have strength, I have increased armor, I have life regeneration, which is a nice stat as well for this build. Plus anything to your raw stats, maximum mana, maximum life. For example, those will be really good as well. And then I'll point out one more stat here that did make a huge difference in making this build better or just easier to play is those last two traits there on the gloves, for example, life per enemy killed and mana per enemy killed. You can also get those per enemy hit, I believe, but those are like your sustain traits where you're going to just get a lot of resources, a flood of resources back when you kill off groups of enemies, and that happens all the time in Path of Exile. So you want to start stacking those. Get a couple pieces, every time you see life per enemy killed or mana per enemy killed, that's going to help a lot. Now, obviously that's not going to work on a boss fight. That's really where your potions are going to be more useful. I never have to use potions unless it's a boss fight. So that's pretty much how it works on this build. And by the way, here are the potions that I have currently. After Act 1, obviously you can get much better than this, but this is just where I'm at currently, and it's working really well. But like I said, Mercenary, probably one of the best starting classes in the game. Very easy to play, very powerful in terms of your damage output, and also being a range class, being able to avoid those boss mechanics and really do all your damage from max range is a huge advantage in this game. So yeah, definitely recommend this build. If you guys have any questions, let me know down in the comments section below. I'm probably going to try out some of the other classes next. So look out for more guides on the way. If you'd like to see that, let me know. If you'd like to see more written guides, I do have a website, hacktheminotaur.com. Let me know if you'd like to see written guides over on the website as well if you want to see this in more detail, and I can do that. But yeah, just a fun game to play right now. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, do me a favor, crush that like button. Much appreciated. And as always, I hope you're doing well. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you around in the next video.